You think you can just sit there, old man, like you own the place? The words sliced through the calm hum of the corner perk cafe like a blade. Mugs froze midair. Conversations died in half-breathed pauses. The man who spoke, a broad-shouldered biker with a thick beard and a vest that read Iron Scorpions, sneered as he towered over a silver-haired customer by the window. What he didn't know was that this old man had once been called Doc by soldiers who owed him their lives. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Veteran Story channel so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. Arthur Peterson, 88 and still sharp as the morning frost, looked up from his coffee. His flannel shirt was clean and pressed, his faded green cap embroidered with the simple words, Vietnam Veteran. The hat wasn't a boast. It was a quiet memorial to the friends who hadn't made it home. Oak Haven was a peaceful town, the kind of place where the biggest scandal was a late library book. But peace, as Arthur knew, was fragile. It took only one act of arrogance to shatter it. The rumble had come minutes earlier. First one motorcycle, then 5, then a whole swarm of engines that made the cafe windows tremble, the Iron Scorpions. They parked across the square like they owned it, black leather and chrome flashing under the soft morning sun. Their leader, Razor, was the kind of man who thrived on fear, tall, mean-eyed, with the posture of someone who'd never been told no. He pushed through the cafe door with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, well," Razor said, his voice like gravel. "Look what we've got here, a war hero enjoying his morning brew." Arthur's hand didn't shake. He simply took a slow sip. "Morning's still good," he said evenly. "No need to ruin it." Laughter rippled through the gang. One of them, a thin man with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, snickered. "Vietnam vet, huh? What did you do over there, Grandpa? Polish boots?" Arthur didn't flinch. The cafe smelled of coffee, toasted bagels, and now, danger. Behind the counter, Sarah, the young waitress, froze. Her eyes darted toward the phone beneath the register. She was trying to call for help, but Arthur knew better than to count on it. In a town like Oak Haven, trouble always arrived faster than the police. He placed his mug carefully back on its saucer. "I serve my country," he said softly, but his voice carried. "Can any of you say the same?" Razor's smirk faltered, just for a second. Then came the mockery again, louder this time, more forced. "Served, huh? The only thing you serve now is coffee. This town belongs to us." Arthur met his gaze. His spine straightened. For an instant, the decades fell away, and the calm, disciplined medic of Firebase Condor stood in his place. "Young man," he said, "I've seen real monsters. You're just playing pretend." The cafe went silent. Even the coffee machine stopped its steady hum. The gang shifted, restless, unsure. Then Razor's face twisted in anger, and he slammed a hand on Arthur's table. "You think you're better than us, old man?" Arthur's blue eyes didn't waver. "No," he said, "just older, and smart enough to know when boys mistake noise for power." Outside, the sun glinted off the row of motorcycles like a warning. Inside, time seemed to stretch, drawn taut between youth's recklessness and age's unyielding calm. Sarah's voice quivered as she whispered into the phone. Arthur caught her reflection in the window. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then, without another word, he reached into his pocket. The bikers tensed. They thought he was calling the cops. But the old flip phone in his hand wasn't dialed to the local sheriff. No, Arthur Peterson was reaching for a promise he'd made decades ago on a night when fire and rain fell together over the jungles of Vietnam. He pressed one number, the same one he'd sworn he'd never need to use. And as the phone began to ring, the old man known as Doc whispered under his breath, "Time to remind them what respect really means." The ringtone stopped after the second buzz. A voice came through deep and gravelly, carrying the weight of old battles. "Doc Peterson? I'll be damned. Haven't heard that name in years." Arthur's lips curved into a faint smile. "Hello, General Thorne. I hope I didn't wake you." "Doc, I haven't slept properly since '68. What's going on?" Arthur's eyes flicked to Razor and his gang. still circling him like wolves. "Just a little trouble in Oakhaven," he said evenly. Some young men seemed confused about the meaning of respect. There was a pause. Then Thorne's voice hardened into steel. "Where are you?" "The Corner Perk Cafe," Arthur said. "No rush. They're not going anywhere." He ended the call without waiting for an answer. The calm that followed was chilling. Razor noticed it first, the subtle shift in the air. He frowned. "Who the hell were you calling, old man?" Arthur took another sip of coffee, unbothered. "Someone who still remembers what courage looks like." Outside, the low hum of engines began to build. It was faint at first, then steady, deliberate. Not the chaotic roar of the iron scorpions. This was a formation. Controlled. Military. The first bikes of the Sentinel Guard rolled into the town square like a wave of precision. People came out of shops, drawn by the sound. 50 riders, then 75, then 100, each one in dark leather vests marked not by skulls, but by unit patches, medals, and insignias of old wars. They parked in perfect symmetry, engines idling in a low, unified growl. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Who are they?" she whispered. Arthur's eyes softened with something close to pride. "Friends," he said simply. The lead rider dismounted, tall, silver-haired, his presence commanding even without saying a word. General Marcus Thorne had the kind of bearing that made men stand straighter just by proximity. He removed his helmet, met Arthur's eyes, and smiled. "Doc," he said. "Been a long time." "Too long, General," Arthur replied. "Sorry to drag you into my morning routine." Thorne's gaze shifted toward the iron scorpions, who were frozen in disbelief. "No apology needed. You saved my life once, guess it's time to return the favor." Razor's bravado cracked. He took a step back as the Sentinel Guard fanned out, forming a semicircle around the square. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "You think you can scare us with a bunch of retirees on bikes?" Thorne tilted his head slightly, his smile thin. "Son, those retirees fought in places that'd make you cry for your mother." Laughter rippled through the veterans. Low, knowing, dangerous. Razor tried to recover. "This is our town," he shouted. "You got no right—" Thorne cut him off, his voice quiet but razor sharp. "You lost the right the moment you laid a hand on one of ours." The Sentinel Guard didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. Their discipline alone was a weapon sharper than any blade. The air was thick with unspoken authority, the kind that came from men who'd already faced death and didn't fear it anymore. Arthur stood slowly, his hand steady as ever. "You see, Razor," he said, stepping closer. "You thought respect came from fear. But real respect. It's earned. It's built one act of courage at a time." Razor's jaw tightened, his eyes darting between the rows of veterans now surrounding him. "You're bluffing," he hissed. "Am I?" Arthur asked softly. Then from behind Thorne came the unmistakable thrum of more engines. Reinforcements. Veterans from neighboring counties alerted by the call. The sound was like a heartbeat, steady and unified, filling Oakhaven with a power the iron scorpions couldn't match. "You can leave now," Thorne said, his voice calm but final. "Or you can stay and learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." Razor swallowed hard. The gang's laughter had vanished. The false confidence that had carried them into the cafe was gone. Now there was only silence, heavy, suffocating, broken only by the gentle clinking of Arthur's cup as he finished his coffee. "Mount up," Razor barked finally. His voice cracked on the command. The iron scorpions stumbled toward their bikes. Engines sputtered to life, a chaotic retreat in contrast to the guard's synchronized hum. Before leaving, Razor turned in the saddle, pointing at Arthur. "This isn't over, old man. You've just made yourself a target." Arthur's response was calm, almost kind. "You're not the first to make that mistake." As the gang roared away, Sarah exhaled shakily. "Are they really gone?" "For now," Thorne said, glancing toward the horizon. "But they'll be back. Bullies always come back." Arthur looked down at his phone. then out the window, where sunlight gleamed on the chrome helmets of the sentinel guard. "Then I guess," he murmured, "we'll be ready." The cafe door closed gently behind him as he stepped outside, into the rising chorus of engines and the proud, unspoken unity of soldiers who had never forgotten what it meant to stand together. The battle for Oak Haven had begun, not with a war cry but with the quiet conviction of one old man refusing to bow. By late afternoon, Oak Haven had transformed. The once silent town square was alive again, not with fear this time but with purpose. The Sentinel Guard had set up a calm, organized perimeter, bikes parked in formation, radios crackling quietly, veterans moving with the same precision they had carried from the battlefield into civilian life. Arthur sat on the cafe porch beside General Thorne, sipping from a fresh cup of coffee Sarah had nervously brought him. Across the street, townspeople peeked through shop windows, whispering, watching. Hope, faint but unmistakable, was beginning to return. "They'll regroup," Thorne said, scanning the horizon. His tone was matter-of-fact, the way a man might discuss an oncoming storm. "Gangs like that don't take humiliation lightly," Arthur nodded. "No, they don't. But this time they'll know they're not the only ones who can fight back." Thorne turned to him, his expression softening. "You haven't changed a bit, Doc. You're still walking into fire like it's Sunday service." Arthur chuckled quietly. "And you still think I ever planned these things?" From across the square, the police chief approached. Chief Roberts, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s whose gait carried a soldier's discipline. The three men greeted each other like old comrades. "Heard about your little standoff this morning," Roberts said. "Half the town's been buzzing since. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Doc." Arthur glanced at his coffee. "Sometimes a nest needs stirring before it can be cleared." Thorne leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've got manpower issues, Chief?" Roberts nodded grimly. "Not enough officers to deal with these scum. The Iron Scorpions have been tightening their grip for months. Extortion, intimidation, vandalism. People stopped reporting it because nothing changed." "Well," Thorne said, a spark of command returning to his eyes, "that changes today." He stood, facing his assembled veterans. The men and women straightened instinctively, years of conditioning snapping into place. "First platoon," he barked, "escort duty. No one walks alone tonight. Second and third, split the town into sectors. Patrols every street, quietly, professionally. This isn't a show of force. It's a reminder that Oak Haven is protected." The order rippled outward with swift efficiency. In less than 10 minutes, the streets that had once been ruled by fear were now watched over by disciplined pairs of veterans, their presence calm but unmistakable. The townspeople came out slowly, some even offering water or handshakes. For the first time in a long while, the town looked alive. Arthur stayed seated, watching the movement unfold. He felt something stir in his chest, something that had been dormant since his days in uniform. Not pride exactly, purpose. Thorne looked down at him with a knowing smile. "You've started something bigger than you realize." Arthur's eyes met his. "I didn't start anything, Marcus, they did. I'm just making sure it ends the right way." Across town, however, trouble was already brewing. In an old warehouse at the edge of the industrial district, the Iron Scorpion's lair, Razor paced like a cornered animal. The echo of his boots on the stained concrete mirrored his anger. 100 vets? He spat. On bikes? In formation? You're telling me that old man called in an army? Snake Tattoo leaned against a crate, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. Not just any army, he muttered. They're soldiers, Razor, real ones. That general guy? I looked him up. Marcus Thorne, Silver Star, 3 tours. Led the Sentinel Guard since the 90s. They're not a gang. They're organized. Another biker, older with a scar down his cheek, Grinder, stepped forward. He's right. These ain't barroom brawlers. They've seen hell and come back from it. We go head-to-head with them, we lose. Razor's hand shot out, grabbing Grinder by the collar. We don't lose, he snarled. Not in my town. But even as he said it, his voice wavered. Deep down he knew. The Iron Scorpions were bullies, not soldiers. They thrived on fear, and Arthur Peterson had stripped that power from them with one phone call. Meanwhile, back in the square, the atmosphere was shifting again. The afternoon light had softened, casting long shadows across the street as Arthur prepared to head to his weekly chess game at the community center. True to his word, Thorne insisted on sending an escort, 2 veterans on bikes flanking Arthur's old Chevy as it rolled through town. When he arrived, his friend Tom Mason, a Korean War veteran and hardware store owner, was already setting up the board. "Heard you made some noise today," Tom said with a grin as Arthur sat down. Arthur smirked. "Just keeping the peace." "Funny," Tom replied, moving his first pawn. "That's what you said in '72. Around them, the community center buzzed with quiet conversation. Word had spread fast. About the bikers, about the veterans, about the old man who had refused to be bullied. Men and women who'd once hidden behind locked doors were talking again, planning, hoping. Halfway through their second game, General Thorne entered, drawing a respectful silence from the room. "Doc," he said, setting his helmet on the table beside the board. "They'll come for you first." "I know," Arthur said softly, studying his next move. "That's why we won't wait for them." He made his move, a quiet, deliberate advance. "Sometimes," he murmured, "the best defense is to remind your opponent that you still know how to play the game." That night, as the Sentinel Guard patrolled the sleeping streets of Oak Haven, Razor sat in his darkened warehouse plotting revenge. And though the town was quiet, a storm was building, one that would test every lesson Arthur Peterson had ever learned about courage, respect, and the kind of strength that doesn't fade with age. The next confrontation would come soon, and when it did, Oak Haven would never be the same. The next morning dawned bright, too bright, that eerie kind of calm that often comes before the storm. Oak Haven's streets looked peaceful, but the air felt charged. The townspeople sensed it. Shopkeepers kept one eye on their storefronts and the other on the horizon. Veterans stood guard in pairs outside the diner, the gas station, the hardware store, anywhere the iron scorpions might strike. Arthur Peterson woke early, as always. The same ritual: shave, dress, coffee. The quiet routine grounded him, but today the coffee tasted different, sharper, edged with anticipation. He looked out the window of his modest home and saw the silhouettes of 2 Sentinel Guard bikes parked across the street. Watching, protecting. He smiled faintly, grateful but uneasy. "You can't protect me from everything," he murmured. But deep down he knew, this wasn't about protection anymore. It was about standing together. By noon, word spread. The Iron Scorpions were on the move. Sarah burst into the cafe kitchen, her phone shaking in her hand. "They're heading this way," she gasped. "Dozens of them. They've got chains, pipes. It's bad, Arthur." Arthur rose slowly from his chair, every joint protesting but his resolve unshaken. "Then we'll be ready." The Sentinel Guard mobilized instantly. Veterans took positions at every intersection. Chief Roberts coordinated from the station, dispatching patrols and alerting fire crews. And in the center of town, Arthur stood in front of the cafe, the same spot where it all began. The rumble started as a faint vibration underfoot, then grew into a thunderous roar. The Iron Scorpions came in a black wave, engines screaming, leather vests glinting in the sunlight. They rolled into Main Street like conquerors returning to their throne. Razor led the charge. His eyes locked on Arthur, cold and furious. He dismounted, tossing his helmet aside. "You think you can take my town, old man?" he shouted. "You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone?" Arthur didn't move. His voice was steady. "It's not your town, Razor. It never was. You just borrowed it while good people were too scared to stand up." The crowd gathered, townspeople, veterans, shop owners. They lined the sidewalks, silent but watchful. Some of them held hammers, others broom handles. Improvised weapons, but more importantly, symbols. They weren't afraid anymore. Razor's gang spread out behind him, engines still growling. "You made a mistake," Razor spat. "You should have left things alone." Arthur tilted his head slightly. "And let you keep terrorizing this place?" "No, I made the right choice. Maybe the first real choice anyone's made in a while." Razor's sneer deepened. "Respect," he said mockingly. "You keep talking about it like it's some kind of trophy. I take what I want. That's how the world works." Arthur took a step forward, his blue eyes bright with defiance. "You can take a man's money. You can take his safety. But you can't take his respect, not unless he gives it to you. And I don't give mine to cowards." A murmur ran through the crowd. The words hit like a spark in dry grass. Razor lunged. Before he could reach Arthur, a massive hand clamped on his shoulder. General Thorne. "Stop." Stand down, Thorn growled. You've already lost. Razor twisted free, red-faced. You think I'm scared of you? Thorn's tone dropped to something colder. You should be. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Then the Iron Scorpions made their move, a dozen men rushing forward shouting. But the Sentinel Guard didn't flinch. They didn't even raise fists. They moved with quiet, practiced precision, sidestepping blows, blocking chains, disarming attackers with controlled efficiency. No chaos, no rage, just mastery. Within minutes, the gang's assault dissolved into confusion. The veterans weren't fighting to hurt. They were fighting to stop. And the townspeople saw it. They saw calm triumph over chaos, unity over intimidation. Razor stumbled back, panting, his confidence unraveling. Around him, his gang was faltering. A few still swinging wildly, others already on the ground, subdued by steady, unflinching hands. Arthur approached slowly. It doesn't have to end like this, he said. Walk away. Start over. Razor's laugh was hollow. Start over with what? I built this. Arthur shook his head. You built fear? It doesn't last. It never does. The word struck something deep. For a heartbeat, Razor's fury wavered. But pride burned brighter. You haven't seen the last of us, he snarled, backing toward his bike. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. He mounted his motorcycle, revved the engine, and roared off, his gang scrambling to follow. Within seconds, they were gone, a cloud of exhaust and empty threats in their wake. For a long time, no one moved. Then slowly, applause began. First from Sarah, then Tom, then the crowd. It swelled until it filled the whole square. Arthur looked around, at the faces of people who, just days ago, had lived in fear. He saw something different now, pride, courage, solidarity. The kind of strength no gang could ever steal. Thorn came to stand beside him. They'll come back, he said quietly. Arthur nodded. I know. But next time they'll find a town that doesn't bow. The sun dipped low, painting the streets gold. Veterans shook hands with shop owners. Children waved at the Sentinel Guard as they remounted their bikes. For the first time in years, Oak Haven felt safe. But deep inside the shadowed warehouse across town, Razor was already planning his revenge. His pride was wounded. His control slipping, and wounded pride, Arthur knew too well, was the most dangerous kind of enemy. The war for Oak Haven was far from over. Night fell over Oak Haven like a slow tide. Streetlights flickered on, throwing long amber shadows across the newly quiet streets. But the peace was deceptive, fragile like glass waiting to shatter. Inside his small house at the edge of town, Arthur Peterson sat at his kitchen table, a map of Oak Haven spread before him. Red circles marked recent trouble spots. Tom's hardware store, Sarah's cafe, the gas station. Each one a reminder that the Iron Scorpions weren't gone, only hiding. Across from him sat General Thorn and Chief Roberts. The three men were silent for a long while, the only sound the steady tick of the wall clock. Finally, Thorn spoke. We embarrassed them. That kind of humiliation festers. They'll come back smarter, angrier, and more dangerous. Arthur nodded slowly. Let them. They're still boys chasing power. We'll show them what real strength looks like. Before Thorn could respond, a voice crackled through the radio on the counter. It was Sarah, her tone sharp with urgency. Movement near the warehouse district. Looks like 20, maybe 30 bikes. They're splitting into groups. Something's happening. Roberts grabbed his jacket. They're spreading us thin on purpose. Classic misdirection. Thorn stood. Then we hold formation. First and second patrols, but Arthur raised a hand, cutting him off. His voice was calm, steady. They're not after us tonight. They're after the town. They want fear back. He was right. Within minutes, the radio filled with frantic reports. Fire at Tom's hardware. Molotovs at the diner. Shots fired near the VFW hall. Thorn's voice thundered over the radio. All units converge on downtown. Non-lethal response only. Protect civilians first. Arthur rose, reaching for his coat. I'm going too. Sarah's voice burst through the speaker. No, Arthur. You're the target. You can't, he cut her off gently. I'm not hiding while they burn my home. Outside, the night blazed orange. Sirens wailed. The town square, the same place where peace had seemed possible just hours earlier, was chaos. The Iron Scorpions, desperate and furious, were striking everywhere at once. But this time, Oak Haven wasn't paralyzed. Veterans moved through smoke and fire, their actions coordinated, efficient. They formed human chains to douse flames, shielded civilians, directed traffic. Civilians fought beside them, firefighters, shopkeepers, even college kids with buckets of water. It wasn't panic anymore. It was resistance. Arthur reached the cafe just as a firebomb shattered against its outer wall. Without hesitation, he grabbed a blanket from the back of his car, doused it in a puddle, and smothered the flames. Sarah appeared through the smoke, her face streaked with soot but fierce with determination. "They're trying to burn down everything we rebuilt," she said. Arthur met her eyes. "Then we rebuild faster." A Sentinel guard bike skidded to a stop nearby. Thorne dismounted, his expression grim. Razor's escalating. These aren't just punks anymore. He's hired professionals, mercenaries. I've seen their tactics before. Arthur frowned. Then we adapt. He looked around, at the burning storefronts, the terrified faces, the chaos that Razor had unleashed. And then he saw it. The fear he'd fought so hard to erase creeping back into people's eyes. He climbed onto the hood of a car, his voice rising above the crackle of fire and the whine of sirens. "Listen to me," he shouted. "They want you afraid. They want you to think this is hopeless. But this," he gestured to the flames, the smoke, the destruction. "This is the sound of them losing control. They think they can destroy what we've built. But Oak Haven isn't wood and brick, it's us." The crowd froze, turning toward him. His voice grew steadier, stronger. "They can burn our buildings, but they can't burn our courage. They can break our windows, but they can't break our will. You want to show them what strength looks like? Stand together. Help your neighbor. Don't give them back what we already took in our freedom." Cheers broke out. Men and women surged forward, helping each other, hauling hoses, clearing debris. Sarah grabbed Arthur's arm, eyes shining. "You just lit a fire they can't put out," she said breathlessly. Thorne joined them, nodding. "He's right. We fight this on our terms now. We rebuild, we fortify, and we make sure Oak Haven can never be threatened again." By dawn, the fires were out. The damage was heavy, but the spirit of the town stood unbroken. Blackened walls still smoked, but people were already sweeping, hammering, patching. Coffee was being poured from the cafe's battered doorway. Children carried water buckets, mimicking the veterans they idolized. Arthur stood in the middle of it all, exhaustion written deep into the lines of his face, but his eyes alive. "They wanted to scare us," he murmured half to himself. "Instead, they reminded us who we are." Thorne approached with Chief Roberts, both covered in grime. "They overplayed their hand," Thorne said. "They've made enemies out of everyone in this town. Even the ones who used to look the other way." Roberts nodded. "And with the footage Sarah recorded tonight, we've got enough to bury them legally, if they don't destroy themselves first." Arthur exhaled, gazing toward the hills. "They'll try something desperate next. Pride always does before it dies." As the first rays of morning light touched the ruined buildings, Oak Haven began to hum with the sound of hammers, saws, and voices full of resolve. The Iron Scorpions had tried to burn the town to the ground. Instead, they'd ignited its soul. Days later, Razor would return, not with chaos, but with something far worse, a plan born of wounded pride and professional help. But by then, Oak Haven would be ready, because under the ashes of the old town, something new had taken root: unity, courage, and the quiet strength of those who refused to surrender. Arthur Peterson knew the fight wasn't over, but as he stood beneath the morning sun, surrounded by friends and fellow veterans rebuilding what the fire had tried to take, he felt something deep and steady inside him. Not hope exactly, something older, something stronger. It was resolve. The kind forged in jungles and battlefields, carried home and passed down like an unspoken oath. No one gets left behind. Not then. Not now. Not ever.